I never thought I'd be here telling this story. 6 years of marriage, and I'd have never guessed it would come to this. My world unraveling in ways I never expected. I've been reflecting a lot lately, trying to piece together the events that led to the end of everything I thought was solid. I guess it all started with Emily. We were happy once. I mean, that's how these things always begin, right? It wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but for the most part, we were content. I'm an accountant, nothing flashy. My job doesn't exactly come with the excitement of a rock star or a tech mogul, but it was steady. I provided for us, and I thought that was enough. But Emily, she was always looking for more. Her dream was to be a celebrated interior designer, but it was like she was stuck in place. She was good at what she did, better than good, really, but the recognition and the success she wanted just weren't coming. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had some clients, some projects, but they weren't enough to satisfy her. And I could see that frustration eating at her, day by day. Emily didn't come from money, but she always had this dream of living a life of luxury. She'd talk about traveling the world, buying expensive things, living in a beautiful house filled with high-end furniture. I always listened to her, but I didn't know how to give her what she wanted. My job didn't allow for that kind of lifestyle. I had my routine, the same desk, the same numbers, day in and day out. We'd have the same conversations, and it seemed like the more I worked, the more I couldn't give her what she craved. I tried to be there for her, but Emily started to pull away. I noticed it little by little. She'd spend evenings with friends, working late, always busy. I wasn't blind to the fact that she was slipping away, but I figured it was just a phase. What I didn't know then was that something much deeper was happening. I couldn't have predicted what was about to unfold. It all changed one evening. Emily came home later than usual, looking more distant than ever. She had this new air about her, distant, a little aloof, like she was lost in her own world. She didn't seem angry, but there was a coldness to her I couldn't explain. I asked her about her day, and she told me it had been fine, but something was off. I had no idea it was the beginning of the end. Then, she met Robert. Robert was one of my father-in-law's friends, older, a businessman, successful and rich. He'd been in Emily's life for a while, but I never really paid much attention to him. I figured he was just another one of those older men who liked to give unsolicited advice to the younger generation. But when Robert started offering Emily help with her career, something clicked for her. She was thrilled at the prospect of working with someone who could actually get her in the doors of the right places. I thought it was harmless at first. After all, who wouldn't want a mentor in the industry? She started spending more time with him, talking about projects and ideas, and I was fine with it. Until it started to get weird. Emily started acting different. The spark in her eyes when she talked about Robert wasn't the same as when she talked about me. It was a new kind of excitement, one I hadn't seen in years. At first, it was all about business. At least that's what she told me. But I began to notice the late-night texts, the whispered conversations behind closed doors, the way she would smile when Robert's name came up. And then came the first warning sign. I'll never forget it. One night, I got home a little earlier than usual, and the house was quiet. I figured Emily was in the living room, but when I walked past our bedroom, I saw her through the crack in the door. She was sitting on the bed, phone in hand, laughing. Her laughter was so genuine, so carefree. Nothing like the tired, forced chuckles I had been getting lately. I couldn't help but overhear snippets of her conversation. It's just been so hard, Robert. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. I froze. Robert? I whispered to myself. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but there it was, the unmistakable feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more signs. Emily was always on her phone, always in contact with Robert. Even when she was home, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. We barely spent any time together. I tried to bring it up, tried to talk to her about it, but she always brushed it off. I'm just busy, James, she would say, her tone distant. It's work. You know how it is. But it wasn't just work. I could feel it. I started watching her more closely, picking up on things I hadn't before. Her tone with Robert was different. She wasn't just discussing work anymore. She was asking for advice, sharing personal things with him. things I thought were reserved for me. I even caught her staring at her phone with this soft, almost affectionate look on her face. It made my blood run cold. I tried confronting her once, but it didn't go well. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "You've been so distant lately. Is there something going on with Robert? Are you seeing him outside of work?" She snapped. "Are you serious right now, James?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "I'm just trying to get my career off the ground, and you're acting like a paranoid child. It's just business. You wouldn't understand." She stood up, slamming her chair back with a force that made me jump. "You're always so predictable, James. You never change. Maybe if you could actually keep up, I wouldn't need to rely on anyone else." Her words stung more than I let on. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted between us. The woman I married wasn't the same anymore. I didn't have solid proof yet, but I was beginning to see the cracks in the facade. And that was when Catherine, Emily's sister, started to notice too. She had always been close to Emily, and I think she saw the changes long before I did. One evening, Catherine came over for dinner. Emily was in the kitchen, doing her usual thing, distracted, distant. But Catherine pulled me aside when I went to grab drinks. "James, is everything okay with Emily?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for answers. "She's acting different. Not herself." I didn't know how to respond. How could I tell her what I suspected without sounding like a fool? But Catherine wasn't easily fooled. "I think you should talk to her, James," she added. "I've never seen her this way before. Something's not right." I couldn't shake that feeling. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. I had no proof, nothing concrete, but I knew in my gut that this wasn't just about work. And that's when I met Michael. Michael was Robert's business partner, a man I'd met only a handful of times. I didn't know much about him, but one night, Robert invited me to dinner with him and Michael. I went, thinking it was just a casual get-together. But as we sat around the table, I could tell Michael was a little too interested in me. He asked too many questions, about my work, about Emily, about our marriage. It didn't feel right. It felt like he knew more than he should. "You know, James," he said, his smile thin, "Robert talks about you and Emily a lot. You must be proud of her." I didn't know how to respond. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. It felt like he was testing me, trying to see if I knew. And maybe, deep down, I did. But I didn't have the courage to confront Emily yet. I wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming. But the truth is, I had suspicions long before it all hit me in the face. There were signs, little things here and there, but I wasn't ready to face them. At least not until I had the undeniable proof. It happened on an ordinary evening. I had just finished a long day at work and came home tired, just like I always did. Emily was in the living room, tapping away on her phone, her usual distraction. I had noticed that her phone had become her constant companion over the last few months. She was always on it. Never a moment when her eyes weren't glued to the screen, whether she was in the middle of a conversation with someone or just scrolling aimlessly. At this point, I didn't need to be a detective to know something was off, but it wasn't until that night that I finally found the piece of the puzzle I had been avoiding. Emily left her phone on the counter, face up, while she went to the bathroom. That was all it took. I knew I shouldn't, but I picked it up. I told myself I was just going to look at the time, maybe check the weather, but when I saw the message notification pop up from Robert, my stomach dropped. I hadn't seen his name in a while and I couldn't help myself. I opened the text. "Can't wait to meet after he leaves for work," it said. My heart stopped. I read it again, as if seeing the words more than once would somehow make them less real. But no, there it was. I knew right then that this wasn't just about business. Robert wasn't just her mentor. This was something else. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just read, but everything felt like it was falling apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her right there, but I didn't. I needed to know the full truth. I needed to see her face when I asked her about it. When she came back into the room, she seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. Her eyes flicked to me, but she didn't seem to register what had just happened. She smiled at me, but it felt hollow. I didn't smile back. Instead, I locked eyes with her and held up the phone. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze. Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. What? Are you snooping through my phone now, James? Really? I felt a rush of anger, but I tried to keep it together. It's not about snooping, Emily. It's about trust. What's going on with Robert? Her face went pale. I watched her lips quiver for a moment before she spoke. What are you talking about? You're being ridiculous. It's just business, James. I didn't believe her. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest as I confronted her again. You really expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen? The texts, the late nights, the way you're always with him? What is this, Emily? What's going on between you two? She stood up, her voice rising in anger. I can't believe you. You don't trust me, do you? You never have. You're always so caught up in your work. You never listen to me. You never see me. I'm constantly trying to make things better, and all you do is work, work, work. You're the one who's been distant. You've been emotionally unavailable for months now. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. I've been distant? You're the one who's been disappearing for hours at a time, talking to Robert more than you talk to me. You've been so busy with him that you can't even see what's right in front of you. I don't even remember what happened after that. All I know is that we yelled at each other for what felt like hours. She accused me of being paranoid, of not supporting her, of being cold and neglectful. I told her I had every right to be suspicious, that I wasn't the problem, that she was the one who had changed. But no matter what I said, she stuck to her story. There was nothing going on. It was all in my head. But I knew better. I knew what I had seen, what I had read. I knew what the truth was, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. The night ended in silence. She retreated to the bedroom, leaving me sitting there in the living room, alone with my thoughts. I felt like I had just been punched in the gut, but I wasn't ready to let it go. I couldn't. Not now. The next day, I went to see Catherine. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't emotionally involved in all of this. Catherine and I had never been especially close, but she was Emily's sister, and I knew I could trust her. She had always been the more level-headed one, the one who seemed to see things clearly when I couldn't. When I walked into Catherine's apartment, she could see something was wrong immediately. James, what happened? She asked, her voice gentle but insistent. I told her everything, about the text, the argument, everything. I expected her to defend Emily, to tell me I was overreacting. But instead, she sat quietly and listened. After a long pause, Catherine spoke. James, I think you need to take a step back and really think about this. Something's not right. I can feel it too. You need to confront Emily again, but maybe this time, you need to get the truth, no matter how painful it might be. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but she was right. I couldn't keep living in this lie. I needed answers. I started thinking about Robert, about his business dealings, about the people he worked with. He was too smooth, too polished. I had always gotten a weird vibe from him, but I had never questioned it. Now, everything about him felt like a threat. I needed to dig deeper. If Robert had crossed boundaries with my wife, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I needed to expose him, to find something that would hurt him the way he had hurt me. I started meeting with some of Robert's business partners, trying to learn as much as I could. I wasn't playing nice anymore. The more I dug, the more I uncovered about his past. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a man with a history of taking advantage of women who worked with him. The more I learned, the more it became clear. Robert wasn't just helping Emily with her career. He was using his position to manipulate her, just like he had done with other women. The anger inside me grew with every new piece of information. I was going to expose him. I was going to make sure he paid for what he was doing to my wife. But then something unexpected happened. Catherine and I started spending more time together. It started off innocently enough. I would help her with a project at work, or we'd grab coffee and talk about life. She was going through her own struggles with her job, and I found myself offering advice, just like I used to with Emily. It wasn't long before I began to feel a connection with Catherine, one I hadn't expected. She listened to me in ways Emily hadn't. She understood my frustration, my pain, and slowly, without either of us planning it, that connection turned into something more. It started with a simple touch, a hand on my shoulder, a look that lingered just a moment too long. But before I knew it, we were crossing boundaries we hadn't intended to. It felt wrong, but at the same time, it felt right. Catherine understood me in ways Emily never had. And maybe, just maybe, I was getting the support I had longed for all along. But this wasn't a simple affair. This wasn't just about revenge on Emily or Robert. This was a complicated mess of emotions, betrayal, and confusion, and I had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen without making sure I got what I deserved. If you had told me a few months ago that I'd be sitting here planning how to destroy my wife's life, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I was, each step bringing me closer to a truth I could no longer deny. Emily had betrayed me, not just with Robert, but with her entire attitude, her selfishness, her disregard for everything we had built. I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. I had spent too many years sacrificing for a relationship that, as it turned out, was never really mine to begin with. It wasn't enough to confront her. Confrontation was easy. I wanted to do more than just confront her. I wanted revenge. I wanted her to understand the depth of what she had done to me. It was as if my life had been a slow erosion of trust, and now I was ready to burn it all down. I knew the first step was to solidify my position with Catherine. The guilt I felt for getting involved with her ate at me daily, but I couldn't ignore the growing connection between us. Catherine and I were finding comfort in each other in ways I hadn't experienced in years. She was everything Emily wasn't: empathetic, understanding, and emotionally available. But it wasn't just about the physical attraction. Catherine gave me a sense of validation, the kind of validation I had sought from Emily but never got. And now, Catherine was my ally, whether she realized it or not. At first, it was all subtle. We spent more time together, talked more openly. I leaned on her for advice and shared the deepest parts of myself: my anger, my frustration, and my betrayal. Catherine listened, not with pity, but with genuine understanding. I could see that she wasn't just a sister-in-law anymore. She was someone who had become emotionally invested in my pain and in me. But I knew I couldn't let this relationship cloud my judgment. I couldn't forget why I was doing this. I had a plan, and Catherine was just another pawn in the game I was playing. Over the next few weeks, I focused on Robert. It wasn't enough to just know about the affair. I needed to expose him in a way that would damage his reputation and his business. He was successful, powerful, and arrogant. But I knew that beneath his polished exterior, there were cracks. Every successful man has skeletons in his closet, and I was determined to dig them up. I started meeting with Robert's business partners under the guise of wanting to learn more about his business. At first, they welcomed my questions, but as I dug deeper, they began to get uncomfortable. It didn't take long to figure out that Robert's empire wasn't as clean as it seemed. There were whispers of shady deals, unethical practices, and even rumors about his treatment of female employees. I began collecting evidence, documents, recordings, anything that would prove that Robert wasn't the saint he made himself out to be. I was meticulous, calculating each move, each piece of information I gathered. This was more than just payback for my wife's infidelity. This was about taking down everything Robert had built and showing him that he was nothing more than a fraud. But as my plan unfolded, things started to get complicated. Catherine was beginning to question her role in all of this. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation between the two of us, she confronted me. Her eyes were wide with confusion and hurt. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to understand something. Are you doing this for yourself, or for revenge?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Catherine had always been straightforward, but this time, it was as if she saw through every layer of my facade. She could see that I wasn't just angry at Emily. I was angry at the entire world, and I had been using her to fuel that anger. "I'm doing this because I've been betrayed, Catherine," I snapped, trying to defend myself, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "This isn't just about Emily. This is about Robert, too. About what they've taken from me." "But what about me?" she asked quietly. "What about us?" The guilt washed over me in waves. I wanted to tell her that I was using her for comfort, that she was my way of coping with the chaos, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I lied. "I'm not using you, Catherine. You're more than that. I care about you. But I need to finish this. I need to take control back. She stared at me, her face a mixture of confusion and sadness. I don't know if I can be a part of this, James. I don't know if I can keep going like this. The weight of her words hung in the air. I could tell she was struggling, torn between her growing feelings for me and the guilt of betraying her sister. But Catherine was already in too deep. Despite her hesitations, she stayed. And that, in some strange way, solidified everything I had been planning. The next phase of my plan was set into motion. I knew Emily's family would be the perfect audience to hear the truth. The entire family had always viewed Emily as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was the successful, charming, beautiful one. I had always been the quiet, stable one, the one who kept his head down and did what was expected. But now, I had the power to shatter that image. I arranged for a family gathering under the guise of a casual dinner. Emily had no idea what I was planning, and Catherine was reluctantly on board. I could see the discomfort in her eyes, but she never backed down. As the evening wore on, the tension between Emily and me grew. I kept my cool, trying to act like everything was normal, but inside, I was seething. The time was coming. The moment arrived during dessert. I had orchestrated the conversation so that Catherine would bring up Emily's relationship with Robert in front of everyone. I knew it would be hard for her, but I also knew it would be impossible for Emily to deny it once the details started spilling out. Catherine, nervous but determined, spoke up. James and I have been talking, and we've uncovered something. Something you need to know, Mom, Dad, she said, looking directly at Emily. Emily looked confused at first, then annoyed. What is this? Why are you bringing this up now? Catherine hesitated, but I nudged her forward. Tell them what you found out, Catherine. The words spilled out. Catherine revealed everything. How Emily had been seeing Robert, how they had spent hours together behind my back, and how Robert had manipulated Emily into believing she was something she wasn't. The family was stunned into silence, and Emily's face turned pale. She tried to defend herself, tried to explain it away, but the more she spoke, the more it became clear that her excuses were hollow. You don't understand, James, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. Robert was just helping me. He was just a mentor. I never meant for it to go this far. But the lies didn't hold up. Catherine and I knew too much now. We laid it all out, the late nights, the texts, the phone calls, the meetings. Every single detail painted a picture of a woman who had betrayed not just her marriage, but her entire family. The room was silent, except for the sound of Emily's frantic breathing. The fallout was immediate. Emily tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but her excuses were transparent. Her family was shocked, and they turned on her, demanding answers she couldn't provide. I watched it all unfold, feeling a mix of satisfaction and emptiness. But it wasn't over. Emily's betrayal had shattered the family, and in some twisted way, I had gotten what I wanted. But in the process, I realized something. Revenge had consumed me, and now I was left with nothing but the wreckage. The fallout from that night was far more dramatic than I had anticipated. When Catherine laid bare Emily's affair in front of the family, I thought that would be enough to bring the truth to light. But Emily wasn't going down without a fight. She didn't have the decency to own up to her actions. Instead, she went straight into damage control mode. At first, she flat out denied everything, trying to manipulate the situation and accuse Catherine of exaggerating. This isn't what it seems, Emily said, her voice wavering as she looked at her parents. Catherine is just upset. You don't know the full story. This is all a misunderstanding. But there was no way to backpedal from the evidence we had gathered. Text messages between her and Robert, the meeting notes detailing their one-on-one time, and the recording, where Emily admitted her feelings for Robert were irrefutable. It was a nightmare for her, one that she couldn't spin into a believable narrative. Listen to this, Mom, Dad, I said, calmly pressing play on my phone. The recording filled the room with Emily's own voice. I don't know what to do, Robert. I'm so drawn to you. You're everything I've been missing. Her mother, the one who had always been Emily's greatest supporter, flinched. Her father, a man who had always prided himself on being stoic, was visibly shattered. But Emily wasn't finished yet. She looked at me, eyes wide with anger, her desperation clear. "This is manipulation," she cried. "You've been trying to destroy me from the beginning. James, you're not even a good husband. You're the one who doesn't give me what I need. You're the one who pushed me into this." But the damage was done. No matter how much she screamed and denied, the truth had been laid bare. The family was in disarray. Some stood by her, mostly her mother, who refused to believe her perfect daughter could do anything wrong. But others, especially her father, were devastated. He had always trusted Robert like a brother, and the realization that Robert had not only betrayed him but also played a hand in tearing apart his daughter's marriage was a crushing blow. "You knew about this?" her father demanded, voice shaking with disbelief, turning to Robert. You're the one who caused all of this?" Robert stood there, fumbling for words. "It's not what it looks like," he tried to say, but his voice faltered. This was a mistake, a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness? That was what he had to say for himself? Emily's father, crushed by the betrayal, exploded. "A mistake? You've destroyed everything, Robert. My daughter's life, my friendship with you, all of it. You're nothing but a selfish, manipulative man." Robert's attempt to salvage his image fell apart in front of the entire family. His once immaculate reputation as a respected businessman was shattered in an instant. His past sins and his twisted manipulation of Emily became public knowledge. His business partners distanced themselves. Clients pulled out, and his contacts, some of whom had respected him for years, dropped him like a hot potato. The scandal didn't just stay within our family. It quickly leaked into the wider social circles. Gossip spread like wildfire, and Emily's name was now synonymous with betrayal. She had once been the glamorous interior designer everyone envied, invited to the best parties, rubbing shoulders with the wealthiest and most influential people. Now, she was the subject of cruel whispers. Friends she had once thought of as close, loyal allies began to distance themselves. Lena, one of Emily's closest friends, who had also been close to Robert, was the first to speak out publicly. One afternoon, after a few too many drinks, Lena confronted Robert at a party, demanding to know what role he had played in all of this. Their argument was loud, heated, and humiliating. The confrontation quickly turned into a public spectacle, with the guests watching in shock as Lena tore into Robert, accusing him of using his charm to destroy families for his own satisfaction. The fallout from that altercation was swift. Robert's already crumbling reputation took another hit. His business suffered further, and he became the laughingstock of our social circle. Emily's friends, one by one, started to cut ties with her, either quietly or publicly. Some, like Lena, expressed their disappointment and disbelief in her actions. Others simply walked away, unwilling to be associated with a woman who had brought such scandal upon herself. But Emily? She refused to acknowledge the full extent of her actions. She tried to salvage her career by blaming me for everything. "I couldn't do it all alone," she said in interviews with the few journalists still willing to speak with her. "James wasn't supportive. He couldn't give me the life I wanted. I had to find someone who could." Her words didn't sit well with anyone. Her attempts to justify her affair only made her look worse. People saw her for what she was, a woman who had used her marriage as a stepping stone to get what she wanted, a woman who was now desperate to shift the blame and maintain her image. It didn't work. Her career in interior design quickly collapsed. Clients canceled contracts. Her glamorous life came crashing down as the public turned on her. She tried to pick up the pieces, to hold on to some semblance of her former self, but nothing could repair the damage. Her emotional stability faltered. I watched her, once so confident and poised, now unraveling before my eyes. Her obsession with wealth, beauty, and validation had led her down a dark path, and now she was left with nothing. She was alone, and no amount of pleading could fix that. Throughout all of this, Catherine and I grew closer. Despite the chaos surrounding us, we found solace in each other. One night, after a particularly intense argument with Emily, Catherine and I found ourselves in each other's arms. The kiss was tentative at first, but it quickly turned into something deeper, something neither of us had expected. I could feel the guilt gnawing at me, the sense that I had manipulated Catherine in my quest for revenge. But the more I spent time with her, the more I realized that what we had wasn't just about my anger. I cared for Catherine, more than I had ever cared for Emily. She understood me in a way no one else had, and I couldn't ignore it. Catherine seemed to feel the same way, although she was still uncertain. She had doubts, questions about whether this was the right path. But I could see the way she looked at me, the way she trusted me. We spent hours talking, sharing our pasts, our dreams, and everything in between. Slowly, she began to believe that we could have something real, something beyond the revenge and the hurt. But just as things were beginning to take shape between us, Robert made one final, desperate attempt at redemption. He reached out to me, hoping for some kind of forgiveness. He admitted, in a rare moment of humility, that his affair with Emily had been a moment of weakness, driven by the pressures of his business and his loneliness. He pleaded for a chance to redeem himself, to fix what he had broken. I listened to his apology, but I didn't care. Robert had shown his true colors. He had crossed a line that I couldn't unsee. He had betrayed not only me but my family and my trust. I had no sympathy for him. "You've destroyed enough lives already," I said coldly. "I will never forgive you, Robert, and I have no intention of letting you repair your image. You've earned this." And with that, I closed the door on any chance of reconciliation. As for Emily, she continued to spiral. The woman who had once had everything now had nothing. Her life, her career, her relationships, all gone. And in the end, I realized that revenge hadn't brought me peace. It hadn't brought me closure. It had only left me empty, standing amidst the wreckage of everything I had once known. After the scandal, Catherine and I started fresh. We moved into a modest apartment, far from the chaos that had defined the past few months. The simplicity of it was a relief. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. We focused on rebuilding our lives and finding peace. Catherine, having landed a job at a marketing firm, began to thrive. She felt fulfilled again, not by the validation of others, but by her own growth and independence. I continued my work as an accountant. The routine was comforting, and for the first time in years, I felt content. We spent our days together, enjoying the little things, cooking meals, watching movies, taking walks in the evenings. Our relationship, which had started as a way to get back at Emily, began to transform into something genuine. There was no longer any bitterness or revenge between us. We had become partners, helping each other heal from the wounds of our pasts. In contrast, Emily's life was unraveling. She had lost everything. The affair had destroyed her marriage, her reputation, and her sense of self. Her parents, though heartbroken, couldn't continue to support her in the way they once had. Her father, in particular, could no longer look at her the same way. The guilt of her actions weighed on her. She was isolated, jobless, friendless, and without the life she had so desperately tried to build. Her once thriving career in interior design had collapsed. Clients canceled contracts, and the industry, which had once adored her, turned its back. Emily tried to salvage her image by blaming her emotional neglect from me, but the world didn't buy it. Her attempts at defense only highlighted her desperation, and the public quickly lost sympathy for her. Then there was Robert. His downfall was just as swift as Emily's. His business partners deserted him, his clients abandoned him, and the once respected businessman became a pariah. He tried to reach out to his estranged wife, begging for forgiveness, but it was too late. She had no interest in reconciling. Robert retreated into his own despair, watching as everything he had worked for disintegrated. His fall from grace was a stark reminder of how easily everything could slip away when driven by selfish desires. As months passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. At first, revenge had been all-consuming. I thought I needed to punish Emily and Robert for what they had done, but in the end, I realized that my anger had only chained me to the past. Letting go of that bitterness had been liberating. I didn't feel the need to get even anymore. The drama, the chaos, it was all in the past. I had moved on. Catherine and I took a weekend getaway to a quiet lake. Surrounded by nature, we found a place of peace. It was the first time I felt like I could breathe deeply again. We talked about our future, our hopes, and what we wanted out of life. For the first time, I felt a genuine excitement about what was ahead. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was ready for what was coming next. Catherine had healed, too. She had found new friends, people who accepted her for who she was now, not who she had been in the past. This new circle helped her rediscover her confidence and build a life of her own. We were no longer bound by the mistakes of our past. We were free to create something new together. Meanwhile, Emily visited the same lake. I didn't know if she had realized the full weight of what she had lost, but I knew she was facing it now. As she sat alone, watching the sun set over the water, I imagined her contemplating the ruins of her life. She had sacrificed everything in her pursuit of wealth and approval, only to end up with nothing. The emptiness she must have felt was a reminder of the consequences of her choices. I didn't feel anger toward her anymore. I didn't feel pity either. Emily had made her choices, and she was now facing the fallout. I could only hope that, in time, she would find a way to rebuild her life. But that was no longer my responsibility. As Catherine and I walked hand in hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The past was behind me, and I was no longer bound by it. The love I had with Catherine wasn't about revenge. It was about healing and building something new. I had found my redemption, not through punishing others, but by choosing to let go and embrace the life that lay ahead. And with that, I realized that this was just the beginning. Not the end of a chapter, but the start of something far better than anything I could have imagined.